Let's begin with an image. Picture this. You're standing on a perfect beach. The Caribbean Sea in front of you is, well, it's an impossible blue, a color that feels like it was invented just for this moment. The sand is white, almost like powder beneath your feet. And behind you, the hotels rise up, all clean lines and quiet symmetry. Everything here, it just feels permanent, inevitable. Like this landscape was carved by time itself, always meant to be exactly as you see it now. But what if I told you this place isn't ancient? That it's not, in any real sense of the word, natural? This whole place is, in the words of the very people who created it, a banker's fantasy. It's a meticulous invention, born not from a love of the ocean, but from a deep national anxiety that was about to boil over. To really understand how this paradise was manufactured, we have to travel back in time, back to the late 1960s. Because long before the white sand and the luxury resorts, there was a very serious problem brewing, hundreds of miles away, in the boardrooms and government offices of Mexico City. You see, for decades, Mexico had been riding a wave of incredible growth. It was called the Mexican Miracle, and it had built up industries and kept the country stable. But by the late 60s, that miracle was starting to fade. The country was facing a huge balance of payments deficit. Now, put simply, that just means it was running out of foreign money, specifically US dollars or divisas, and Mexico needed them fast. It was becoming a matter of national urgency. The solution, believe it or not, would be found right here, in a place that back then was described as little more than an underdeveloped, snake-infested frontier. Seriously, in 1970, this perfect beach we're imagining was just a lonely strip of sand. It was a political vacuum, home to barely 100 people. It wasn't a destination. It was just a blank spot on a map, waiting for someone to give it a purpose. And so, the idea for Cancún wasn't born from some beautiful dream of a perfect beach. No, it was born inside the Bank of Mexico, as lines of code on an old mainframe computer and columns of figures on a spreadsheet. Right from its conception, you have to understand, Cancún was never a place. It was a project. And the way they went about it, well, it was unheard of at the time. It was all about the data. First, the technocrats identified the problem. We need dollars. Then, they gathered just massive amounts of information on 25 different spots along the coast. They analyzed everything: water temperature, how often hurricanes hit, even the specific grain quality of the sand. All of this data was then fed into a computer model. We're talking cutting-edge stuff for the 1960s. The machine crunched the numbers, and it spat out a name: Cancún. Not because it was the most beautiful, but because it was the most optimal, a cold, calculated choice. But why Cancún specifically? The computer didn't just pick it for the weather. It picked it because it was a political vacuum. Think of it like an empty stage. There was nobody living there to displace, no local government to argue with, no complicated history to sort out. It was a completely blank slate, the perfect, frictionless place to build a massive, top-down government project at lightning speed. But having a perfect blank slate creates its own kind of problem, doesn't it? I mean, you've got nothing but jungle, sand, and a computer printout. How on earth do you convince the entire world to invest in, and more importantly, to actually visit a world-class destination that doesn't even exist yet? Well, this is where a marketer named Guillermo Grimm comes in. He couldn't take pictures of fancy hotels or crowded beaches because there weren't any. So he created an image instead, a single solitary footprint in the sand just about to be washed away by the tide. And the slogan he wrote? Pure invention. The ancient Mayas, as it turns out, did not vacation here. But it didn't matter. The story was more powerful than the truth. A brand was born, long before a single bag of cement was ever poured. And the speed of what happened next is just staggering. In 1970, you've got about 100 people here. Just 4 years later, the first hotel opens its doors. By 1992, over 2 million people are visiting every single year. And today, the whole Cancun, Riviera, Maya corridor sees more than 30 million visitors a year. It's just explosive growth. But before a single tourist arrived, a different kind of migration had to happen first. Tens of thousands of workers were drawn from the poorest parts of southeastern Mexico, all lured by the promise of what some were even calling a Mexican-American dream. They came to build a paradise, but in the process, they also built something else entirely, an invisible city. These were people fleeing the collapse of old industries, like the trade in henequen fiber or chicle gum. They arrived to find a giant construction site, not a city. So they did what they had to do. With their own hands, they cleared patches of jungle and built shelters out of scrap. The conditions were incredibly harsh. We're talking 10 people crammed into a single room. No running water, no drainage, no paved streets. And here's the thing. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't an unforeseen consequence. It was a known byproduct of the project's incredible speed. One of the project's own urban planners, a man named Alfonso Alarcon, actually wrote a memo to his bosses. He warned them that they were creating a precarious settlement, a sprawling slum whose problems would be impossible to fix for decades to come. They knew. And that right there reveals the core design of Cancun. It was deliberately engineered from the very beginning to be two separate and deeply unequal cities. You have the hotel zone, this globalized, perfectly maintained strip of land with a stunning view of the sea. That's for the tourists. And then you have the other city, the service city. Hidden away, no sea view, built for the workers. The entire system was set up to make sure that the social contrasts, as they called them, would remain completely hidden from view. And yet, if you look at it by the only metrics that mattered to its creators, dollars and cents, the Cancun project was a spectacular success, almost unimaginable. It was a machine that worked better than anyone dared to hope, but it was a machine that prized objects, hotels, airports, and especially dollars over the people who built it all. The scale of this success is, well, it's hard to wrap your head around. Today, over 30 million visitors come through the Cancun Riviera Maya corridor every single year. To put that in perspective, that's like the entire population of Australia or Canada cycling through this one narrow strip of coastline annually. And to handle that human wave, a truly immense infrastructure had to be built. There are now more than 120,000 hotel rooms along this corridor. That creates one of the densest concentrations of tourist resorts anywhere on the planet. And here it is, the bottom line. This one project, this single banker's fantasy, now generates over a third of the entire nation's income from tourism. It solved the problem it was designed to solve. It brought in the billions of dollars Mexico so desperately needed, and it basically secured the country's economic future for a generation. But that incredible success came at a price, a profound and often hidden cost. Researchers who study Cancun have described it as a young city suffering from the deep-seated problems of a sick adult, illnesses that were contracted right at its birth. Let's just consider something as basic as water. A single tourist on vacation in Cancun uses on average up to 7 times more water per day than a permanent resident who lives just a few miles away from the hotels. That is the immense invisible strain this model puts on the region's very fragile natural resources. And those costs just ripple outwards. Environmentally, about half of the original mangroves and coral reefs, the very things that made this place so special, are gone. Economically, it's a bubble. 97% of the goods used in the hotels are imported, so that incredible wealth doesn't really filter down into the local communities. Socially, that engineered inequality is still there. And what you have now is a massive city of nearly 1 million people, still struggling with the same infrastructure problems that were predicted 50 years ago. This is the great paradox of Cancun. It's a city whose success was its biggest problem. It grew too fast, too perfectly, according to the plan. And in doing so, it created these deep structural flaws that were there from day one. It truly is a young city suffering from the diseases of its own childhood. And now, we're back where we started. You're on that same perfect beach. The view hasn't changed a bit. The water is still that impossible, invented shade of blue. But your understanding of this place, your understanding of what it is and how it came to be, that has changed completely. You now knew this beach was chosen by a computer. It was sold with a story that wasn't true, long before it was real, and it was built by a hidden workforce. So the question to leave you with is this. As you stand there, on that sand, are you really in a paradise, or are you simply standing inside a very successful and very complicated equation? BASTA. This is Mexico.